in the United States, Rupa is treated as an expert on independent journalism and Justin Trudeau's censorship of not just independent journalists, but of just regular people. And there are different ways that Justin Trudeau has been censoring regular people. Some of it is through his censorship bills, so C11, C18, controlling what you can see, say, and do on the internet, and giving the broadcast regulator control over the internet. But also he censors people by these other means, as in if you say something wrong, if you support financially protest movement that Justin Trudeau disagrees with, you can have your bank account frozen. So why don't you just shut up a little bit? And that a lot of that happens. People say, I want to get involved. I want to support things, but I'm worried about what the government's going to do to me if I do. And Rupa testified to that. And I think we've got our technical difficulties sorted out. So let's roll Rupa testifying in the United States.
I'd like all of you to think of me as a time traveler from the not too distant future, coming back to the present to offer you a glimpse of what could lie ahead for America. I live in a time in which, in the name of fairness, you can't share the stories you write for my news publication on social media. I live in a time in which, in the name of the common good, you can be kicked out of your bank and online payment system simply for expressing the wrong political views. I live in a time in which, in the name of social justice, you can commit a serious crime but get a more lenient sentence if you happen to be the right skin color. I live in a time in which, in the name of safety, you can be arrested for exercising your right to peaceful protest if you happen to be protesting the wrong thing. Of course, I'm not a real time traveler. I just live in Canada. Americans, and perhaps those in this chamber, surely think Canadians are too nice, we're too polite to embrace this sort of proto-authoritarianism. But it's more accurate to say that our niceness made us susceptible to the new authoritarianism, undermining the foundations of our liberal democracy. If it sounds like I'm overstating things, allow me to share 3 stories that illustrate this creeping authoritarianism. First, a few months ago, I reported a story from my publication, The Free Press, about a high school principal in Toronto who had been humiliated in front of his colleagues by a DEI consultant. The principal's crime, besides being white and male, was that he objected to the consultant's assertion that Canada is a less just society than America. The humiliation he experienced ultimately led him to commit suicide. I wanted to share that story on Facebook. When I tried to, I was barred from posting it. I received a message that stated, in response to Canadian government legislation, news content can't be shared. I was confused. Then I remembered the recently adopted Online News Act. The law forces social media companies to pay online media companies to link to their content. Facebook, instead of paying for that content, barred its users from posting it. Government officials insist that this is only a matter of fairness, a way of making sure that media companies are compensated for the news they report. But really, this new law props up legacy media dinosaurs like the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, Bell Media, and other companies, which are subsidized by the federal government, and all of which can be counted on to echo Justin Trudeau's worldview and toe the party line. Not being able to post was annoying, but it wasn't the end of the world for me. I don't depend on Facebook for my income. The same cannot be said of Christopher Curtis, which brings me to my second story. Chris is a 38-year-old renegade journalist entrepreneur in Montreal who runs a digital newsletter called The Rover. He calls himself woke. You might think that he's exactly the kind of journalist the Trudeau government would elevate. He's on the political left. He publishes stories about the plight of the homeless and police brutality. The problem is that, unlike government-funded news companies, independent media companies are truly independent, which means they report stories that don't comport with whatever the government wants them to report. For example, in September 2020, The Rover reported a story on federal mistreatment of Mohawk Indians. This month, it published a story about migrant workers who had been abused and trafficked with the unwitting help of the federal government. But under this new law, The Rover can't build its audience. Unable to post content on Facebook or Instagram, the newsletter can't reach new subscribers. It cannot grow its subscriber base. This is a slow death, says Chris. For now, he's unsure how he's going to support his partner and their 3-year-old daughter. He's thinking of going back into construction, which takes me to my third story. Danny Bulford, now 41, used to be an officer in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the equivalent of the FBI. For years, he was a sniper in the Prime Minister's protective detail. Then in 2021, Danny quit because he didn't want to get his COVID vaccination. In early 2022, truckers descended on Ottawa to protest new COVID vaccine requirements. Danny joined them. The government declared a state of emergency. Danny, like many demonstrators, was arrested and later released without charge. Then something chilling happened. On February 17, 2022, Danny logs into his bank accounts, starting with his checking and savings accounts at the CIBC. But instead of seeing his balance, he had about $160,000 in there. The only thing he saw was a dash. Then he logs on to Scotiabank to see about an additional checking account. Once again, there was no sign of any money in his account. Finally, he logs into the Royal Bank of Canada, which handles his MasterCard account, and he was told he had no access to any credit. Danny's wife was also unable to access any of these accounts. Suddenly, they were worrying about how to cover their next mortgage payments and how to feed their 3 kids. That is what it means to be debanked. Debanking has been one of the Trudeau government's weapon of choice
good.
Since 20.
She goes on for about 6 minutes there. But that is Rupa's testimony before the Select Subcommittee on the Weaponization of the Federal Government, telling our American friends what can happen to you when your federal government weaponizes itself in a partisan manner against its own citizens. And that's what we've lived through at least the last 3.5 years. But I would suggest far sooner. If you were a Christian, when Justin Trudeau took power, he started weaponizing the federal government almost immediately against Christian organizations who simply wanted to qualify for a summer jobs grant for summer students to run things like soup kitchens and summer camps for underprivileged children. Justin Trudeau made those church organizations sign an attestation to the Liberal Party's values on transgenderism, reproductive rights, which is just a euphemism for abortion. And many of them, in good conscience, could not sign it. And so they lost funding for their programs for the underprivileged. And in the name of ensuring, I guess, complete and total ideological homogeneity in this country, Justin Trudeau punished the most vulnerable and underprivileged people in the country who would access these soup kitchens and these summer camps, stripping these people of opportunities that they wouldn't normally have. So we're at the end stages of weaponization of the federal government against Canadians, and Americans are just sort of knocking on that door. And I hope they don't go down this path. Luckily, they have a First Amendment, which should go a little further in protecting them than our Charter of Rights and Freedoms does here.